All Talk with Tom Jordan and Kevin Dietz on 760 WJR.
It's not just me talking about this. Everyone is now, because even the New York Times is putting out the numbers. They can't be ignored. In the Des Moines area, they're covered in snow, and I think it's only going to get worse as we are approaching the Iowa caucus. It's going to be Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley.
Thanks for having me.
There's a lot of troubles right now for the Biden administration's cabinet. Have you noticed? Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, he's going to be the topic of discussion at an impeachment hearing. The House Homeland Security Committee holding its first hearing today at 10 o'clock. Where there are terrorists now in this country. So they're going to be talking about Alejandro Mayorkas. There's that. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, with what's been going on
they
with
found him?
his health.
They found him?
He's still in the hospital, you know that? That's
Every
what
other
I thought
day?
on Friday when we all found out that the White House wasn't even aware that he has been in the ICU, intensive care unit. They weren't aware, and it's been days gone by. And I thought to myself, does Joe Biden talk to his, secretary? So we know that Donald Trump is the target of Special Counsel Jack Smith related to Trump's actions regarding the 2020 election. Things like talking to state electors and canvassers and claiming fraud and the January 6th riot, those things. Trump maintains his actions surrounding the elections were a legal part of his normal actions as the chief executive.
Thanks for taking my call.
Does Donald Trump have an argument here that he should have total immunity from criminal prosecution?
It's really a gross trap question by the judge.
You're talking about the SEAL team in being involved with an assassination if the president ordered that. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It was a trap. You're right about that. And it was a gross mischaracterization of this question of what if Trump targets a political opponent by taking him out with an assassin from SEAL Team 6. That's a big difference to, Trump telling his supporters to peacefully protest against what he perceived to be fraud. Appreciate it very much. Tim and Westland, thanks for the perspective. All right, so Texas wants its border protected. The federal government won't protect the border, so Texas is enforcing the law on their own. The problem is that the Biden administration doesn't want those laws enforced by Texas, so they're suing the state to get them to stop. And Governor Abbott's like, listen, if we can't protect the border and you won't protect the border, who's going to protect the border? San Diego Field Office, Intelligence Division of Customs and Border Protection, they are warning that those two terror groups, Hamas and Hezbollah, and also the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, well, they are likely entering the United States through the U.S.-Mexico border.
The White House says the impeachment is over.
For the White House to make the announcement that the impeachment is over is disingenuous because, in fact, they also
not their
said...
investigation.
Well, it's not their investigation. And they also said that the Robert Hur report completely exonerated the president. And Robert Hur said, no, not at all. It does not exonerate him one bit. That kind of goes to what they said yesterday about this impeachment. Is the evidence there? If they said the evidence was there to impeach Donald Trump for what he did with Volodymyr Zelensky on a phone call, then the evidence is there for Joe Biden to be impeached for sure.
Good morning, gentlemen.
The Democrats have really been pushing for not only a ceasefire in Gaza, but that Israel shouldn't continue to defend itself from Hamas. But now they're calling for regime change in Israel, what Chuck Schumer said yesterday. Yeah. Not Palestine, not for regime change there, but in Israel. Get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu because he continues this fight against Hamas. And then he's saying we need a ceasefire. And then on top of that, the White House has just renewed these Iran sanctions waivers, which unlocks another $10 billion for Iran. Yeah. And Iran is funding Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis in these various conflicts against Israel.
Yeah, and that's been confirmed, by the way, by Hamas and Hezbollah.
Got to run here, but we appreciate your time. Lynn Patton, Senior Advisor for Trump 2024. Lynn, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
I don't read the comments. It's so nasty out there.
Oh, I know. I try not to, too. Sometimes I do, and I curl up in the fetal position. Just kidding. Charlie LaDuff. Hunter Biden will be a no-show to this public hearing. It was his demand, by the way, that a hearing be public, and that was something that he and this committee had worked out, this agreement that if he gave a deposition, then he, of course, could have this public hearing, which is what Hunter Biden said he wanted and demanded. Well, now Hunter Biden and his attorney, Abby Lowell, says, no, we don't want it. We don't need it. Not going to do it. But the hearing will proceed regardless because Hunter's former business partners, 3 of them, will testify before Congress today, and they will share what they know about Hunter Biden's businesses overseas and their alleged connection to the current president of the United States, Joe Biden, and Joe Biden's alleged participation in those deals while he was vice president and in charge of domestic policy regarding places like Ukraine and China and elsewhere. All right, let's bring in Andy McCarthy back to the program, former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, contributing editor for National Review, a great publication, and, of course, Fox News contributor. Andy, welcome back. Nice to have you.
Tom, great to be here.
So James Comer, the House Oversight Chairman, obviously he's proceeding with these hearings, even if Hunter is not going to be there, because he says after a year of investigations, this committee has enough evidence to show that Hunter's overseas businesses were, at the very least, highly suspect, right? And they say connected to his father's role as a top U.S. government official. Like, that's what he was selling. There was no other product. Do you believe he has the evidence to show that connection there, at least in some form or fashion?
Oh, yeah. No, I think they've shown that in spades. And money goes one way, and the only thing that appears to be coming back is access to Joe Biden. So I think that's the most important part of it.
Right. That's what Comer was essentially saying. He said, listen, we have no credible evidence that the Bidens provided any work product whatsoever. There's no legitimate value. There's no document. There's not even a single hour of work that the Bidens have provided all these business partners overseas.
The politics to kind of take care of itself. Right now, we don't have very good politics in this country.
No, I've noticed. We'll find out. I'm looking forward to the testimony today, and I'm glad it's public. And the Comer's going to say that Joe Biden is the Biden family's closer on these lucrative business deals. We'll find out if they have evidence that leans towards that, and maybe there's just some political fallout here. We appreciate your perspective as always, Andy McCarthy. Andy, great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tom.
We've heard it time and again, and we've heard it again this week, last week, the week prior, the year prior to that the number one message we hear from the left is that they are fighting in this election against a threat to democracy. Progressives. It's a bit oxymoronic because what is progressivism in the first place? Former Attorney General Bill Barr, I don't know if you saw this, he did, I think, a great job at explaining how progressivism in the far left is the actual real threat to democracy. And he did this and he explained it in a pretty hostile environment on CNN with the news anchor Caitlin Collins, who went back and forth with the former attorney general. Collins was arguably feigning her dismay at how William Barr, who was just insulted by Donald Trump, could possibly cast a vote for someone who insulted him. Here's how Bill Barr responded.
I feel I have to choose Trump.
But he's mocking you.
So it's not about me.
It's not about him. It's not about our feelings or who gets insulted. It's about the real threat to democracy, and that is, without a doubt, progressivism.
I think a lot of people hear that, and the case that we just talked about that went before the Supreme Court, essentially, and say, how can you see that and say that Biden is a greater threat to democracy?
Well, where are we losing our freedoms? How are our freedoms being constrained? They're being constrained by the progressive government. And, democracy, especially, from the Anglosphere democracies, the Five Eyes and so forth, the threat's never been for autocratic government on the right.
But how specifically is Biden threatening democracy?
The threat to freedom and democracy has always been on the left. It's the collectivist, socialist agenda, and that is where we're losing our freedom.
Progressives truly believe, and you can trace this all the way back to one of the founding fathers of progressivism, President Woodrow Wilson. They do not believe in a true separation of powers, the three branches of government. They don't want it. Nope. It's too inefficient, is what they'll say. It may have worked well when we were a small country in the early years under George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, back then we were infantile. May have worked then because it simply just takes too long to get stuff done nowadays because we're such a large country. We need to move quickly and nimbly. So that's what Woodrow Wilson began to do under his watch in the early 1900s. He introduced the bureaucracy, the various agencies who are truly now the ones who implement and oversee regulations and these new laws to control how we live our lives. Unelected bureaucrats. Wilson essentially wanted to tear down the constitutional republic for a more European style of governance, an incredibly powerful legislative branch that deferred to, quote, experts to determine what's best for you and me. And that's why we have these issues that pollsters identify as some of the top concerns for most Americans. Illegal immigration is the top issue. The economy and inflation are what voters are most concerned with. It's interesting, though, because Caitlin Collins, in this exchange with Bill Barr, identifies what she and progressives believe to be, they believe to be the real threat to democracy, that Donald Trump is trying to subvert the will of the voters. Listen.
Those two things that you just noted there, you believe are worse than a president of the United States trying to subvert the will of the people by overturning the results of the election?
I think a country, all the things together, like we're not enforcing our borders, we have open borders, we have lawlessness in our cities. We have regulations coming fast and furious, so telling people what kind of stoves they can use and what kinds of cars they have to drive, and eliminating cars and so forth. Those are the threats to democracy.
First of all, this whole subverting the will of the voters is exactly what the Democrats did in 2016 and 2017. Democrats, many of them, were voting to not certify the state electors back then. Did you know that? People like Jamie Raskin were so upset that Donald Trump won. He and many other progressive Democrats voted to not certify the election. The exact same thing Republicans, some of them, tried to do in 2021 on January 6th. Same thing. Not to mention the years-long campaign by candidates who lost that election, namely Hillary Clinton, to delegitimize the candidate who won, who beat her as president. That's the same thing that she wanted an attempt, along with the media, to subvert the will of the voters by trying to get him out of office. But to Bill Barr's point, the real threat to democracy is a stripping away of the freedoms that keep happening right before our very eyes, which for some reason many Americans can't seem to see. The government is supposed to decide which kind of car you can drive, how much companies are allowed to charge for their product or services, how much meat you're allowed to eat, and what you are and are not allowed to say in public. You have government now actively trying to criminalize certain words, and at the same time try to prevent parents from keeping their children from being allowed to see pornographic, and I've seen material in public libraries and in the schools. They call that a threat to democracy. Think about it. What was being chanted the other day in Dearborn? Death to America. Tear down this country. The entire thing. The institution of America has to be destroyed, is what they were chanting. What these terrorist sympathizers were saying wasn't any different than what Antifa was saying in 2020, or any different than what was subtly being said by progressive activists and politicians for more than 100 years. The American way has to be reformed, or it has to go. Woodrow Wilson was a big-time progressive with huge plans for reforming America. He preferred the way Germany did things. And in portions of Europe, he didn't like the separation of powers. Give more power to the legislative branch to control things more was essentially his big idea, and he did that. For the people's own good, massive regulations on how citizens do things. You got to control the monetary system. So he signed into law the Federal Reserve Act back in 1913. He created a central bank and regulated the financial system. He created the bureaucracy system. Elected lawmakers kind of became a front. They passed these general laws so the bureaucrats, the experts, could fine-tune them. That's progressivism. So ask yourself, which party believes it has the answers to how we should live, what we should drive, what we should be allowed to say, in order to protect anyone from being offended by your words and protect you from things that they deem to be too dangerous for you to handle? In fact, which members of which party talk a lot about choice but predetermine the best choices for you regarding education, health care, what you eat, and how much you should pay someone based not on their merit but on an immutable trade within a disfavored industry, and which members of society should pay for the living costs of others? For now, there is a choice, and the decision for now is up to you. So more hostages have been released from Hamas in Gaza, Kevin, but there are still, more than 140 that have not yet been released. So the sixth batch of hostages are expected to be released today, maybe 10 more or so to add to the more than 60 who who have been released. So
the pause is allowing some humanitarian efforts to take place. I don't know what is happening with Hamas, if this is giving them an advantage.
yeah, when you hear from people over there, like in Israel, on that side of it, there is kind of 50-50 in terms of how they feel about this. They're elated that the hostages are being released, but they're also gravely concerned about what might happen again if Hamas is not rooted out of Gaza, because they don't want to have another October the 7th taking place. And you read about this in some of the media outlets in Israel and in the region, is that Israel and Hamas, they might agree to another ceasefire lasting a couple of days or more in order to, of course, do much of the same, more of this exchange with the hostages and the Palestinian prisoners, and to continue to bring in the humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. But here is the complication. And Ambassador John Kirby, he's a spokesman for the National Security Council yesterday, he touched upon the fact that very few Americans have been released, right? So none were released yesterday. And he said that they don't know if Hamas even is aware of all the hostage locations, or if they even have custody of the hostages. Because remember, there are other terrorist factions who also have these hostages, like Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and they're described as even worse than Hamas. So there's not a lot of hope. Maybe today there'll be an American that is released. I think there's been a total of 3. There is little Abigail that was released, now 4 years old, and a couple others a couple of weeks back. But other than that, and there haven't been more. And we know there are Americans in custody still, and the United Nations, and Joe Biden seems to be pushing for a ceasefire as well. But there are some dire consequences of allowing Hamas to continue to win this current conflict. And one of them might be, hey, listen, this pays off. If you attack Israel like they did and you create, let's say, a Palestinian state for them, this encourages more and more terrorism, Kevin. And Alan Dershowitz wrote about this yesterday.
Yeah, Alan Dershowitz suggests that recognizing a Palestinian state might reward terrorists and lead to further violence. Someone else who does not support a two-state solution is Benjamin Netanyahu. The Biden administration is pushing for a two-state solution. Is it a good idea or a bad idea? Let's bring in Alan Dershowitz, constitutional attorney. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good. It's the best idea in the world, except for all the others. I mean, it's just to do it now unilaterally would be outrageous. Ultimately, I've been favoring a two-state solution since 1970. I wrote my first piece favoring a two-state solution, but you don't bring about a two-state solution by murdering 1,200 Israelis, raping women, beheading babies. That's not the way you bring it about. And if the administration, the Biden administration, now calls for an end of Israel's attempt to destroy Hamas, it's coming to a theater near you. If Hamas wins this in Israel, it will export terrorism. That has to be a message.
I absolutely believe that Joe Biden is listening to the likes of Rashida Tlaib. We had a Democratic strategist who said, no, there's no way that he is. I think absolutely he is. And, she's denouncing what she calls these war crimes by Israel against Hamas, but ignoring the countless war crimes by Hamas. And you mentioned the Hamas hospitals. I watched your podcast yesterday, and I think it's a brilliant phrase. That's a war crime. They're using these hospitals in Gaza as shields, essentially, and the patients and the children in them. Why is Hamas getting away with this, do you think?
Because of people like some of the members of Congress for whom, they believe in this thing called intersectionality, which means the world is divided into oppressors and oppressed. And the oppressors are white people, Christian people, Jewish people. The oppressed are people of color, Arabs, Muslims, even those that are extraordinarily wealthy. And under this intersectionality, the oppressed can do no right and the oppressors can do no wrong. And Hamas gets away with it. And it's ultimately anti-American. And the reason that there's so much opposition to Israel by radical leftists is largely because Israel is such a close ally of the United States. And a lot of what we hear is really anti-American. A lot of the kids who are campaigning against Israel on college campuses hate America as somehow innocent when they're as guilty as could be.
They're very crafty in their messaging, and they've been able to characterize themselves as the victim in this. And you said something yesterday that I listened to, and you repeated this phrase from way back, saying, regarding this conflict, Israel and Hamas, saying that the Jews could say to them, listen, we could eventually forgive you, Hamas, for killing our children, but we will never forgive you for forcing us to kill your children.
You know,
Is that
was
for
Golda
real?
Meir.
Yeah.
I know that's Golda Meir said that. She's on videotape.
Is that for
saying
real? You think
that-
that's the strategy that Hamas employs?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. Hamas wants to kill as many civilians as possible. Hopefully they'll be Israelis, but if they're Palestinians, okay. They have what is called the dead baby strategy. They wait for Israel to kill a baby, a real innocent person, a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, and they parade him in front of the television cameras. They don't explain that this is somebody who was used as a human shield by Hamas, and that legally, morally, politically, and in every other way, Hamas is responsible for the death of civilians who were used as human shields. Using human shields in violation of international law. You wouldn't know that from the UN because the UN never condemns anybody but Israel. Israel is condemned, forget about this war, more than all the other countries of the world combined.
It's remarkable.
More
It is
than
remarkable.
Iran, more
Right.
than Cuba, more than China. All the countries of the world combined, Israel is condemned more.
And they get away with it.
defending
Yeah.
Yeah.
Over and over again. Thanks for what you do. I appreciate it. And thanks for joining us. Alan Dershowitz,
Thanks for having me.
constitutional attorney. Thanks so much. More to come. Your calls are next. 800-859-0WJR.